If I ever watched the entire series of Danny Phantom while being really interested in all the characters, I would probably find this episode as the least favorite out of the bunch. And considering I was originally going to be reviewing this episode as part of Cartoon Crisis 2 back in November of 2020, it really shows that this episode has a lot to do with Sam's character. And since Valentine's Half Month is here, as usual, it really feels appropriate to do a review of this episode now instead of, well, basically never. Believe me when I say this is that whenever I think about Sam in this episode, along with the information that she does before and after this, I'm starting to convince that this show, despite being good, was at the wrong time when it comes to character development. I'm saying this because in the 2000s, the character development in cartoons are mostly mixed. I mean, granted, there are shows that do succeed with character development, but at times, there are shows that don't focus on character development, and considering that this was around the time, well, shows like Jimmy Neutron and Fairy Odd Parents are coming to an end when it comes to basically a studio going bankrupt and the end of the golden age of the Fairy Odd Parents, mainly before 2008. I felt like that if this show aired in the 2010s, or maybe even now, I'm pretty sure it would have been much more better compared to its original airtime from 2004 to 2007. I'm just saying, the more I look at the 2000 cartoons, the more I realize that there were a lot more issues with them compared to the future cartoons of the 2010s and 2020s. The episode begins where we get the introduction of Gregor, who Sam immediately falls in love with. Love at first sight, I assume. Considering that Danny Phantom did the same thing with the other female characters, I can instantly tell onto why that people did not like Sam in this episode. Because if you really think of what Sam did before in this episode when it comes to spying on Danny by being with another girl, well, she doesn't like it when somebody else does the same thing, and that somebody else is Danny Phantom himself. For me personally, whenever I think about this show and these episodes, it really feels like that Sam is supposed to be the type of character that is supposed to be a good friend to Danny, and the fact that she instantly goes against him, thinking that it's stroking his ego, I really don't even know what she would feel if someone told that to her. And for me personally, the fact that the hypocrisy is somewhat common in these types of shows, I'm starting to convince that hypocrisy is becoming a major thing nowadays, knowing full well that people can't be able to keep their opinions intact. Otherwise, they can't make up their mind, basically. And for me personally, Sam in this episode is difficult to feel sympathy for, knowing full well that you feel more sympathy to Danny because he's the only likable character throughout this entire episode. And the fact that he just met Gregor, all the while that Sam is instantly attached to Gregor, it really feels like that if he was in a similar situation that Sam is in, which he did, which was before the episode, which I talked about 6 years ago, I'm starting to convince that he would probably be a lot more confident and fully aware of what is really going on right in front of him. Granted, it's debatable if Danny was somewhat likable in the episodes that I talked about in the past, but in all honesty, that was part of Season 1 and this is Season 2. You see, what I feel about Danny in this scenario is the fact that he's just trying to make sure that Sam doesn't get hurt, and while Sam didn't get physically hurt by the hands of Gregor, it doesn't change the fact that what he's doing in this episode is just trying to be a close friend to Sam in order to make sure nothing bad happens. And the only bad thing that he witnessed is Grego kissing Sam. And in all honesty, the fact that Sam doesn't have any second thoughts, especially after the kiss, just goes to show that you can feel more sympathy towards Danny a lot more, knowing forward that Tucker instantly sides with Grego just to make sure that Sam is safe. In all honesty, when there's an episode where Tucker is being mistreated and he deserves some respect, it's honestly difficult to feel the sympathy through other characters in these scenarios for how they're portrayed in episodes that are part of the 2000s. Look, I understand that you may enjoy the show and maybe some of the humor, but the thing is, when the mysterious Mr. Enter stated that the biggest problems of the show involves around the humor, it really shows that it just didn't feel accurate in a situation involving Danny becoming Ghost all the while dealing with teenage drama. Like, the comedy in the Fairly Odd Parents, even if I don't enjoy it nowadays, I can understand the intentions. But in this, it really feels difficult while the characters, especially who are teenagers, are being portrayed like this. Especially since that Sam is being way more shallow than she already is. Like, I'm going to assume that this type of plot will have been much more better if it happened in the Fairly Odd Parents, but at the same time, the characters of the Fairly Odd Parents are really long and do not understand love completely. Granted, I can totally understand that Timmy was way over his head when it comes to his thoughts involving Trixie, but at the same time, compared to this show, I'm going to assume that the comedy just doesn't work completely. And for me personally, it's really difficult to think that the characters are somewhat sympathetic in one episode, but in an episode like this, they're not. It's really, really difficult to take this show seriously, all the while trying to find the redeeming qualities of those characters. Considering that Grego was faking it the entire time when it comes to his accent, then I really don't even know what to expect. Like, his real accent just goes to show that this entire episode, he's mostly there for a prop for Sam to be shallow, all the while we feel sympathy towards Danny. Believe me when I say this, is that the scene involving him exposing himself just goes to show that he's not only stupid, but he's literally a waste of animation. Not the worst, but still a waste of animation. Like, I'm going to assume that his entire motivations is to be friendly towards the people around Sam, but at the same time, I don't even understand how his life would have been like if he started dating with Sam for realsies instead of the screen time that we got in this episode. Because for me personally, it really feels like that he doesn't have a motivation other than just being there in order to be cool around Sam. And the fact that he exposed himself in front of Sam just makes me question the sanity in this episode. Not the show, but in the episodes that are considered bad. You know, I understand that the motivations involving teenagers is that they have multiple crushes and they really want to think wisely on their decision making, but this just really feels like that Sam barely has any positives when it comes to her entire purpose in this episode. Believe me when I say this. When I've witnessed information involving her in episodes before and after, especially the episode where Danny falls in love with Sam due to Amber, then I'm going to assume that it really feels like that the show itself didn't have a proper continuation, or okay, maybe it does have continuation, but continuity involving the characters' relationships with each other without anything like this happening. Because that's what I feel involving 2000 cartoons like this. And that sums up onto why I barely watch these shows compared to current ones. Because at least when it comes to the current ones, despite the bigger problems, they don't have any of the issues involving the characters being completely different in one episode, but then completely doing fine in the following episodes, like none of this ever happened. Like, it's difficult to think that Danny Phantom had these issues knowing full well that there is no focus when it comes to the character relationships. Granted, though, maybe since I didn't watch all the show since getting older, but at the same time, this episode alone is a perfect demonstration onto why I'm not into Danny Phantom. And the reason why I included a clip involving Danny saving Sam in one of my intros is because I want to find a high quality footage of Danny Phantom. What do you really expect? I'm not really a shipper involving Danny and Sam. Like, I did enjoy these two in the Amber episode that I reviewed 6 years ago, but the thing is, it just feels like this episode alone desperately wants me to side with Sam 100%, although I was seeing Danny as a terrible friend who Sam said is stroking his ego. In all honesty, I just don't understand how any of what Danny did in this episode is qualified as stroking his ego whatsoever, when all he's doing is just protecting Sam just in case. You know, in all honesty, these characters in the 2000s are a lot more difficult to attach to compared to the characters from the 2010s, which explains onto why I'm a 2010s cartoon person rather than a 2000s cartoon person. When it comes to the guys in white who are trying to stop Danny, I'm going to assume that their entire motivation in this is just to prevent Danny from saving Sam when it comes to her interactions with Gregor. In all honesty, knowing that these characters appear before and after, this episode really feels a lot more difficult to understand the characters' motivations, despite the fact that these characters are investigating ghost material. The dialogue from these characters is really confusing. Not cringe, but at the same time, if you're going to insult agents who are doing investigations, I'm going to assume that the only way you're gonna make them really stupid is to dumb them down completely. And in all honesty, if I ever see more of these characters, if I ever have the chance to binge watch Danny Phantom, I'm probably not gonna be able to like them, knowing forward that the motivations in the other episodes will probably be worse or just stupid like what they did in this episode. In my opinion, this episode is worse than Girls' Night Out, because as far as I'm concerned, at least in that episode, regardless of the problems, it didn't have all the characters being shallow. And in all honesty, whenever I look at this episode, it really sums up onto why people do not like the shipping between Danny and Sam, and for me personally, I'm one of them. If I'm ever going to look into more of Sam's character in this show, it's most likely the fact that I need to think for myself that she is more than being shallow, but this episode just overexploits her shallowness to a level that I never expect to happen. You know, if I did review this episode back in 2020, I would probably say the same thing, but the more I realize that the more years have passed, the more I understand that these cartoons from the 2000s still good, but at the same time don't age well when it comes to writing and morals. I'm giving this episode a 3 out of 10.